In this example, I need to solve 5x squared minus 6x equals 8. What type of equation do I have here? If you notice here, I have an x squared. Here I have an x. What's the exponent on a plain old x that we're too efficient to write? Remember, it has a 1 on it. So what's the highest exponent on any of the x's? It's a 2. I have an x squared term. Therefore, this is a quadratic equation. And the first thing we try and do when we solve any quadratic equation is we try to factor it. So let's look at the steps to solving a quadratic equation by factoring. The first thing is we must write it in standard form. That means I need everything on one side in descending order, 0 on the other. Is that what I have in my situation here? No, I don't have a 0 on the right-hand side. So I am going to have to subtract 8 from both sides. And 8 minus 8 on the right is going to give me my 0 that I need on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, I have unlike terms, so I'm just going to write them in descending order. 5x squared minus 6x minus 8 equals 0. So that is step 1 done. Now step 2 says factor. What's the first thing we try and do when we factor every problem is we look for a greatest common factor. They don't all have x's, and look at the numbers. I have 5, 6, and 8, so I have no common factor. So now I'm going to factor this trinomial, and I'm going to compare it to ax squared plus bx plus c. A is the coefficient of the x squared term, so my a is 5. B is the coefficient of the x term, so it's negative 6. C is my constant term, it's negative 8. And then I multiply A times C. I get 5 times negative 8, which is negative 40. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to AC, which is negative 40, and add to B, which is negative 6. Hopefully these two numbers come to you quickly, but if not, you can always write out the systematic table. And I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to a negative. That means they have to have opposite signs. And since they add to a negative, the one with the bigger absolute value has to be the negative one. So I'm going to start with 1 and negative 40. And those multiply to negative 40, but what do they add to? 1 plus a negative 40 is negative 39. Not the number I'm looking for. So as I complete the table, I'm going to put it on pause for a second. So you see 2 and negative 20 didn't work, but 4 times negative 10 is negative 40. 4 plus negative 10 is negative 6, which is the number I'm looking for. Now these are not my factors. This is what I'm going to break my middle term down into. So instead of negative 6x, I'm going to write 4x minus 10x. So I'm going to rewrite my equation here, 5x squared, and instead of negative 6x, I'm going to write plus 4x minus 10x minus 8 equals 0. And the reason we do that is now I have 4 terms I can factor by grouping. What do the first two have in common? I think the only common factor is an x. I factor that out. You factor x out of 5x squared, you get 5x. Plus factor x out of 4x, you just get 4. So I have x times 5x plus 4. My middle sign is a subtraction. You always bring that down. And now what do the last two have in common? I think the only thing is a 2. Now be careful, I'm factoring out a negative 2. So that's just the same as dividing this term by a negative 2. So negative 10x divided by negative 2 is positive 5x. and pull a negative 2 out of a negative 8, well, negative 8 divided by negative 2 is positive 4. This is the one here students mess up on the most, so quickly mentally distribute in the negative 2. Negative 2 times 5x is negative 10x. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. You got it right. So now this is my common binomial factor. I'm going to pull it in front. So I can write 5x plus 4 as my first factor. And what goes in the second parentheses? Well, what have I left behind? X minus 2. So I have 5x plus 4 times x minus 2 equals 0. So I have factored it. Now we need to set each factor equal to 0. So I have 5x plus 4 equals 0. And x minus 2 equals 0. And now solve each equation. So on the first one, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I get 5x equals negative 4. Divide both sides by 5. And I get x equals negative 4/5. Sorry, I'm kind of running out of room here. There's one solution. And my second solution comes from x minus 2 equals 0. Add 2 to both sides. X equals 2. So there are my two solutions to this quadratic equation.